Thank you everyone for joining the early stage therapeutics panel at Digital RESI June. This is the second day of our conference and is actually the only panel that we are doing live during the conference. All of our panels were actually pre-recorded last week, so this is a unique opportunity that we're doing, and we hope that everyone who's watching and listening to the session, hope that this will be an informative session. So I will let Brent Ahrens, who's general partner of Canaan Partners, take over, and we'll start with a round of introductions.
Hi, I'm Brent Ahrens, one of the general partners at Canaan Partners. We are an early stage tech and life sciences fund, currently investing our 11th fund, and hopefully number 12 comes online soon. Early stage for us is seed and Series A for the most part. We do a little bit of pre-seed and occasionally later stage opportunities. Within the life sciences side of the fund, the vast majority of what we do are therapeutics. And that could be products, platforms, any of a number of things along those lines. Occasionally medical devices, some health tech or digital health, and not very much diagnostics. Once in a while, life science research tools as well, but primarily therapeutics. Typically putting in 20 to 25 million. And we're there oftentimes for the company creation stages as well. We've had half a dozen or so of those over the last couple of years, including a public company called Arvinas, and the list goes on.
So my name is Anjan Arali-Hali, or AJ for short. I actually am a venture partner for a Montreal-based venture fund called CTI Life Sciences. And although I'm myself based just outside Princeton, New Jersey, I did grow up in Montreal, but I've been living here since 2006. And my role as a venture partner is similar to any other typical partner at a venture fund. Although I'm there half time, and the other half of my time I spend doing on other projects, including my own ALS startup. Just in terms of CTI, we had one fund of 100 million Canadian in 2006, a second of 145. The first fund was very, very successful, multiple exits. The second fund, we are just finishing our last two investments this week, and we're currently raising a third fund. Right now, we're targeting a raise of between 200 to 250 million. We're hoping to have a first close July or August. And we invest purely in life sciences and mostly therapeutic space, about 2/3 Canada, 1/3 US.
Okay, we'll go to Sean next.
Excellent, thanks so much, Brent. So I'm Sean Gandhi. I'm a principal at North Pond Ventures. We're a diversified life sciences venture capital firm based in Bethesda, Maryland, as well as in Boston, Massachusetts. I'm based here in Boston. I lead their Boston office. Our investment remit is quite broad within life sciences. We allocate about a third of our fund to R&D tools, a third to molecular diagnostics, both clinical and research, and then about a third to therapeutics. And particularly within the therapeutic side, we favor earlier stage opportunities, seed and Series A opportunities, but we also engage in Series B and later opportunities as well. So great to meet you all.
Shobha.
Hi there. So I'm with Zontogeny. It's an accelerator based in Boston. I'm the Vice President for External Innovation and New Ventures there. We are sort of, in many ways, the new kid on the block here because it's our very first fund that we're associated with. It's called the Perceptive Zontogeny Venture Fund. So as an accelerator, we're sort of a hybrid between a pure accelerator and a VC firm. And we kind of take the best of both and kind of operate on that. The venture fund is about $210 million and was just closed at the end of 2019. We invest in therapeutics, diagnostics, and devices, and we invest in companies all the way from seed to Series A and B financings. The seed could be as small as $500,000 to 1.5 million, and the Series A on an average could be anywhere $10 to $20 million. Above or below each of those ranges.
And Peter.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Peter from the French venture firm Kerma. We are a fund based in Paris and Munich, currently investing out of our third called Kerma Bio Fund 3 investment vehicle, which is really predominantly focusing on therapeutics And we have done this for the first 2 generations as well. We have, I think, at least in Europe, a reputation of being one of the few VCs who really goes in early. So just as Brent mentioned, we really do company creation. We've done this 4 times in our second fund. We've done it already 5 times with a new fund. And it's all about sort of really working very closely with academic institutions, with the university hospitals directly to create proprietary deal flow and build these companies and then get them ready to really get to good Series A financing. We have currently a fund which has a size of 160 million euros. Having said that, we also have a life science advisory mandate for a bigger French PE called ID Invest, which is part of Euraseo. So in total, we have actually roughly 300 million that we can sort of deploy over the fund lifetime. And again, maybe just to mention, we also have another fund vehicle called Kerma Diagnostics, which covers pretty much everything else from diagnostics up to also what you would call digital therapeutics and other sort of things which are sitting at the convergence between tech and biotech.
So let me start with AJ, is that right? I think you said, I was trying to come back online.
Sure, Brent, that's fine.
Let's talk a little bit about some high level stuff. How do you guys make decisions within your firm? How do you decide to invest yes or no as the participants think about, wait, this black box called VC, what happens? How do you guys go through this process to decide, let's pick this one, but not those other ones? What's that all about?
So it's tough to summarize in about a minute, but I will try. So I don't think I think we're fairly traditional in that respect. Now, each of the partners source their opportunities differently. Of all the partners on our team, I'm probably the one that goes to most of the conferences, and therefore, I will filter what I see in the database of attendees and companies, and of course, I get incoming requests. So I filter that. And I bring it, the ones that I think are interesting to the team. We have a discussion. We have a weekly team meeting, and we'll decide whether or not to proceed to a next step, possibly a non-confidential presentation, possibly confidential disclosure agreement, etc. Now, in terms of therapeutic areas, we have a general sense of what areas we want to play in. Certainly for us, oncology and rare diseases are big. But we're somewhat agnostic. We've done a number of vaccines as well. I'd say what we don't do is typically pain, psychiatry, and diseases that require a lot of clinical development before POC. So Alzheimer's and type 2 diabetes would be a couple.
Great, thank you. Shobha, tell us from your perspective, since you guys are an accelerator, a bit of a different model, yet playing the same spaces with seed and early stage companies. What do you guys look at? What do you go through as you decide to support a company? And maybe tell us a little bit more about what that support means within your accelerator.
Sure. So first of all, we are agnostic. So as far as indications go, modalities go, not only just therapeutics, diagnostics, and devices, but pretty much any indication. So small molecule, large molecules, antisense, cell, gene therapy, everything. So it's very broad mandate. But the way we are managing all of that, in terms of diligence, we have a partnership with Perceptive Advisors. So not only do we have our team and our extended network, but we also work very closely with Perceptive. So that's just as far as the diligence process goes. But really for us, the key differentiators for Zontogeny as an accelerator is we not only just invest in companies, we are looking for companies with a few differentiations here. One is, we're investing in companies wherever they might be. We're not looking for companies that we invest in to move to Boston. So they can stay wherever they are, they can grow wherever they are. So that's a key differentiator. Second thing is, in addition to the investments, we really bring our operational support to the companies. These companies are early stage, they may just have a lead. And so our mission is to bring these programs from preclinical to the clinic. And so for that, you might have companies with just maybe the founders, maybe just a part-time executive, and that's perfect for us. That's fine. What we do is we'll come down, we'll sit down. It's a very collaborative approach. we will help you design your preclinical strategy. We help you design your clinical strategy. And so the goal is to really drive this drug development as quickly and efficiently, in a capital efficient way, to the clinic.
Got it. Okay. I've gotten a couple of questions. I don't know if everybody's seen these things, but let me just throw these out there along the way, and then we'll get back to kind of the list of things. One of the participants asked, who else invests in the EU? We do on occasion. It's a small part of what we do since we're largely US focused, but obviously Kerma does. Others that come to mind, Sofinnova, which sits across town from, or it's actually not too far away from Peter's office in Paris. HealthCap out of Sweden. Peter, who else would you recommend? And others chime in terms of EU investors.
Well, I mean, I guess, there's obviously, we have now a first generation of some really bigger funds, which are especially the Benelux-based funds like LSP or Forbion. You have also Andera Partners in Paris. So these probably are sort of the generation of sort of bigger funds. And then you mentioned already Sofinnova, you mentioned HealthCap. There's also Sunstone in Scandinavia. There's HBM in Switzerland. There's Wellington in Germany. So there is quite a bit, but obviously not as many as in the US.
Okay.
I'd throw in a pitch for North Pond. We have a global investment mandate, and currently we have one investment. It's in Ireland, but we routinely look at companies based in the EU as well.
Okay.
And CTI.
And we are global.
Okay.
And CTI is actually looking to invest in European companies in our third fund as well.
Okay, cool. All right. So good to know for the audience. Hope that's helpful to the one who asked a question. Sean, tell us about areas of high need. Where are you guys aiming the gun? And I'm going to add a little sort of parenthetical from our perspective.
Of course.
I'm going to assume oncology because it seems
oncology is a big
one. Yeah. Where else do you look besides oncology?
Yeah. We're technically indication agnostic. So we have and do look at areas that a lot of other investors may not take a very close look at. I think primarily of, say, cardiovascular disease or metabolic disease. And really what we're trying to look for are companies that are fundamentally trying to reduce cost, increase speed, or reduce risk in drug development. And you can see these companies in many indications that are addressing many unmet needs. And so that's why we're pretty diversified in our approach to therapeutics. I will say one area that we look at very closely that probably a lot of other investors don't look at is infectious disease. And we, particularly like antibiotics, antimicrobials, obviously with the COVID pandemic, I think the venture capital community is hopefully taking another look at infectious disease. But what we see in infectious disease is an opportunity to address some real unmet needs and potentially do it in a way where just as we think about drug pricing and we think about go to market for rare diseases, you can think of it similarly for infectious disease, where some of the greatest unmet needs in infectious disease are truly for what I would call rare infectious diseases, where you have multi-drug resistant organisms that are affecting a small population, but affecting them in a very, very significant way. And so that's kind of one way we look at infectious disease is kind of similar to rare diseases. And so that's another thing that we've taken a closer look at and we continue to.
Let me challenge that a little bit. We've invested in 7 antibiotic companies, a number of antivirals, some vaccines, some that are vaccines through a drug delivery angle. And one of the big things that comes up, and I think this is important for the participants to hear, particularly in the antibiotic space, narrowly defined, is this thing called reimbursement. It's the bane of our existence, particularly around hospital-based products. The launches there in the last several years have pretty much categorically been a bust. And we've been around some of those for better or for worse. We've still done well, but hospital launches have been a bust because reimbursement is tight. Antibiotic stewardship is really difficult. And you're kind of stuck with a, maybe $10,000, $15,000 course of therapy. You just can't get breakout pricing, even though I think you're right. There's a massive opportunity. And you say, look, other life-saving therapies can command, $50,000 to $500,000. A lot of antibiotics are life-saving as well. Yet there's this whole legacy stuff that, decades of history. And so convincing people to pay more is difficult. How do you how would you advise the listeners to wade through those waters?
Yeah, I think to your point, Brent, it's reimbursement is obviously the biggest challenge in antibiotics. And so if there are ways in which to think about an antibiotic as either a chronic therapy for a particular population that frequently gets infections, I think, for example, of patients with cystic fibrosis, ways in which to either dose antibiotics chronically so that it kind of leaves the hospital space and enters the outpatient space. That's one way potentially of looking at it. And then another way is to again narrowly define who gets the antibiotic and have it, hopefully with clinical data, have it be the first line therapy for that very narrow population with that very narrowly defined disease. And of course, you're now reducing your patient population significantly. You're reducing the use cases significantly, but then potentially, because it's potentially life-saving, because it's potentially first line therapy for this very narrowly defined population, maybe you'd be able to get out of that mindset of, well, this is an antibiotic, it should be really inexpensive, and really think about it as a rare disease product, which it really is.
Great, thank you. Let me throw this out and let's get a couple different responses. Are there areas that seem to be overinvested? Somebody can say oncology, but are there particular areas where you'd say maybe a little bit tricky? You can also look at the other side and say, and we'll get to that in a second, other areas where it's tricky because it's not overinvested, but for whatever reasons. But let's talk about overcrowded areas first. Anybody chime in?
I would agree that oncology is overinvested in, quite frankly, and I say that knowing full well that we will invest in oncology companies. So don't ask me to explain that part. But NASH, I think, is another one, just to really pick on one. And it's a tough place to go, but very crowded. I think, and I don't want to get too philosophical, but I think we're as a whole, the industry is moving away from developing large, diseases affecting large populations, and now focusing on a very, very narrow subgroup. So the industry as a whole is treating less people now than it did before. If you want to look at it from that perspective, just look at statins, for example. How many billion people were touched by statins compared to just the thousands and maybe tens of thousands that are being touched by the oncology and orphan disease drugs that we're developing.
Anybody else in terms of overcrowded areas?
I'd chime in and say, particularly within oncology, I think immuno-oncology is probably a very tough place to differentiate yourself. And I think it's because we've actually gotten lucky as a society in that the first few immunotherapies that went on the market are actually pretty good. I mean, obviously it doesn't help lots of patients, but for the patients it does help. It actually helps in a really critical way. And so every time a company has a new immunotherapy, of course, you're naturally going to see how it stacks up against nivolumab, against pembrolizumab. And it's hard because those drugs actually work pretty well in particular in very narrow patient populations. So there's a lot of Me Too's that are out there. And I think the companies that are really going to survive and thrive in immunotherapy are ones that are truly differentiated from products that are currently on the marketplace or soon to enter the marketplace.
And this is from our perspective in our deal flow. I would agree. I've not seen the latest count, but the last time I did see something, the number of combo therapies, meaning a checkpoint inhibitor plus something else, this is probably dated by year, 1,600 different studies underway. Good luck with that. So to the entrepreneurs, sorry to pop your bubble, but if you're looking at combo therapies, it's going to have to be spectacular for us to get excited about it.
Yeah, I think monotherapy is really what we would look for. Monotherapy efficacy as good, hopefully better than the PD-1 inhibitor.
Novel targets as well.
Yep. A couple things that these are questions coming in. If everybody can see these, but they're kind of in the vein of the conversation anyway to help entrepreneurs understand a little bit about, again, this black box. Somebody chime in. Let me throw this one out there. Provide a framework for what is considered a seed round amount versus a Series A. What's different between the two. And then another one, what kind of diligence do you do for a startup with 2 to 3 co-founders or executives and a license of some sort? Obviously, no cash flows, simple cap table. Tell us a little bit about how long it takes and what documents do you want to see in the data room?
All right, I'll start with that. So for the seed, I mean, for us, we are pretty early, I would say, earlier than a lot of VCs like to go into. But as long as you have some in vivo data, preclinical animal data, some animal model data, and you've got some IP that's been filed, that's a good time to start talking to us. And the seed investment is really it's a fairly small amount, but the goal with that is to try and get you to a point, do some critical 2 or 3 experiments, maybe it's just one, experiment, but you de-risk it to a point that then you have a much more attractive valuation. It's a bit of a step up for the Series A. And so really that's our goal. You don't want to go in right away, go for a large Series A. You could, different VCs and different investment firms have different philosophies. Their check sizes are different, their fund sizes are different, and so they make decisions based on that. So for us, that's our purpose. I mean, we are there to provide the first capital into a company that's just been freshly minted and try and get you to a point where you'd be attractive for the typical VCs to come on for a Series A. Now we can do the entire, we can lead the entire way around by ourselves because it's a fairly small chunk for us, $10 to $20 million, or we can syndicate, and we're open to that. But our goal is if we did everything right, by the time you come in for your Series B, you should be in phase 2, or you should be trying to get into phase 2. So that's really the goal. So Series A should take you from your preclinical IND to your phase 1, through your phase 1, and then your Series B should be in phase 2 clinical trials.
Would you say
that's what we shoot for?
Yep, maybe 2 to 5 million for a seed. If maybe that's a bit of a wide range, but all in capital, that's kind of what we see typically. And then a Series A could be 5 to 10 million. Again, quite a wide range there, just depending on the area, the expertise of the team, et cetera. So maybe a bit of a wide band, but Shobha, I don't know if those numbers jibe with yours as well for dollars in for seed versus A. 2 to 5.
For us, the seed is smaller, but it fits in with the A.
Okay, all right. And somebody else chime in. What kind of diligence are you looking to do? What does that look like? Give the entrepreneurs a sense for that. What background materials do you want to see? What are you looking for as you go through the data room?
I think if we talk about really sort of early stage, I think every one of us would probably agree that, you start out basically with the science. It's all the science. I mean, it's all that these people will have in the end. Obviously in many cases, it starts out if we do proactive sourcing with a first interesting publication. So we might not really have anything that is patented yet. There might be an interesting publication around a new target, around a new mechanism of action. So it's all about sort of understanding that. And that's really the in and out. I mean, and then obviously for an academic group, that's probably as much as they have thought about it at that time. I mean, if we have something that's a little bit more advanced, obviously we will then start to look into how to translate that science actually into a product, i.e. we will have to talk to clinicians, we'll talk to KOLs, to key opinion leaders in the space to understand, okay, is there really an unmet clinical medical need for this new approach? So that would be sort of a second stage. And then obviously if something is already more evolved, then you can sort of start digging into, for example, existing medchem, existing screening material, whatever has been produced in terms of data. But I think it all starts with the science.
Okay. So this is the old expression here, the old TV show, the $64,000 question. It's more, millions as opposed to thousands in this case. A question on every entrepreneur's mind. I've been on a lot of these panels for RESI before, but others as well, as I suspect we all have. Tell me, VCs, how do you price a deal? How do you arrive at a valuation of X? What's that all about?
Well, the simple answer. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean that's a challenging question to answer. I think everybody does it differently. Clearly, if you're the lead or the co-lead, I mean, the onus is on you to sort of set the price as opposed to being part of a syndicate. We like to use comps as much as we can. And obviously, if it's a competitive process and a company has multiple term sheets, they're gonna look at which one's giving them the best valuation. So I don't think that's a simple answer. A lot of it boils down to the different variables that come into play on both sides of the table. But I don't know if somebody else may want to take a crack at it.
I agree. Oh, I would agree. I think one I wouldn't call it mistake, but one impression you sometimes get from founders is that they start sort of building elaborate market models, whether it's a bottom-up or a top-down model, whatever it is. In the end, in most cases, we know that the market might be big for some of these drugs, so we don't really care about that. So in the end, how we value something in terms of a pre-money valuation, in the end, the simple answer is it's a question of negotiation, between the founders and the investors. And then obviously we will use whatever objective data is there to solidify that. But in the end, I would agree. It's a question of negotiation and also of comparables, of sort of comparable deals at the same sort of comparable development stage and things like that put it together.
If I can just add one thing, I think it's an important point that Peter brought up. I personally don't pay attention to NPVs and forecasts at early stages. I literally skip over that slide.
I'll share a story. An old friend of mine, I used to work at Johnson & Johnson many moons ago, and he came in with a business plan, and he had a 50-page analysis from some business school professor, and blah, 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 and that's why we should be worth this. And I said, what'd you pay for this? He said, $20,000. I said, I would have given you an answer for nothing because you're a friend. And by the way, this isn't worth the paper it's written on. It's the market sets the price ultimately. A couple of people chimed in, and this is tricky to answer. Can you give a valuation range for an IND completed as opposed to phase 1 completed? Generally speaking, I would say that the further along you are, the higher the price is going to be because you de-risk the opportunity. But the range is all over the place. My last couple of investments were sub 10 million pre, and not raising a whole lot of money. And those that are phase 1 is completed, you could be looking at something, it could be, 5 million to 100 million. It really depends. The other comment I'll make is that to some large degree, it's also, and this is important for the participants, it's a post-money game, meaning pre-money is what it is, and that's going to matter from a dilution perspective. My ownership as an investor, you're sitting at a post-money of X. It's a multi-round game in most cases, and you have to think about what does that next round look like. If I'm sitting at a post that's too high after the A or the B, and there needs to be a subsequent round of funding, you're just setting yourself up for a down round with the next round. So you have to think ahead a couple of rounds.
Yep.
And oftentimes in biotech, we see this. I would say the vast majority of times, we don't see significant markups, maybe from the seed to the A, but once you get A and B and you've got much larger financings coming together, and financing sizes have gone up dramatically over the past 5 years, double plus, there's just not a lot of room for step ups ultimately. And so if we get a courtesy markup, as it's called, 10%, 20%, that's great. Otherwise, assume it's round pricing, share price, flat, and you get a pop when you exit the company or you've got big clinical success. So I think that is what it is. Are you guys seeing any, how do I put this in a polite way? Let me put it in a blunt way. The pendulum swings back and forth. Who's got the leverage here? Is COVID-19 giving us VCs more leverage to negotiate price and just squeeze entrepreneurs? Again, I'm being blunt about it.
Yeah, I actually haven't seen that, and I think it's because there are good biotechs that are out there, and once investors, I would say it's rare for only one investor to really understand that this is a good biotech. And so for the companies that are getting interest from investors, at least what we're seeing is they're getting interest from multiple investors. And so we're really not in any position to squeeze the entrepreneur because they can just go to somebody else and get a better deal. But again, that's just been my experience in the last couple of months. I don't know if other panelists' experiences have been different.
I was surprised. Companies have been coming to us on their own with reduced expectations. Even before we told them anything, they said, well, prior to COVID, we would have expected this, but now we expect this on their own. So
I think what could be happening is not, perhaps you're seeing a smaller pool of investors. For example, some VCs, including ourselves, in our second fund, we've decided to actually put more money, set aside more money in reserve for some of our companies, just in case of an just an extended runway. So then that reduces our ability to do a new investment. So I think it may have reduced the pool. So,
and I think also maybe the pool itself of companies may have also reduced. I mean, I like for our portfolio companies in particular, like we've had many discussions about taking measures internally to increase their cash runway, potentially doing small bridge rounds or small insider rounds to get them further so that they don't have to go out and look for funding now and potentially can wait a year before external funding.
I suspect all of us, sometime between, let's see, March 11th was an interesting day.
Yeah.
Besides the fact happening to be my birthday, that was an interesting day when the president said, travel from Western Europe, and I happened to have been sitting in Paris because I was there for a meeting. I woke up the morning of the 12th because of the time change, and my sons had a little bit of schadenfreude. I said, "I'll see you in a month, Dad," and the other one said, I suggest you get to the UK as quickly as possible because you can still travel home from there." But that kind of created some interesting dynamics. What we saw is our portfolio companies jumped all over things and said, "Whoa, I don't know what this means. I need to extend my runway by at least 3 months, more like, find 6 to 12 months." Do you guys see the same across your portfolios? How do we extend runway?
I mean, bridge rounds, as Sean mentioned.
Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, Sean. But I was just going to say some of the, we've done small bridge rounds as well, and we've tried to get some of the other syndicate partners to also participate where they can.
Some of our companies, they've kind of restructured their business line. So if there was a lot of work being done on much earlier pipeline candidates, they slowed down spending on that and focused on the lead program. That's obviously going to hopefully lead to success. And so that's realized some significant savings.
Okay.
In Canada, we've also had the Business Development Bank of Canada offer sort of COVID-19 relief to companies. So, so they basically match a raise that the company does.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's another program that we've also trying to participate in for some of our portfolio companies.
Okay.
The same is actually happening in Europe. So most countries are actually putting in what they call sort of matching facilities, where exactly what you're describing is happening. So if there's a next funding round coming up, then this will be matched sort of sometimes even 30-70 or 50-50, by basically public money.
Yeah. Okay. A question came in, again, this is in the vein of the overall context here. And the question is basically about control. And Shobha and Peter, maybe speak to this since you're both doing some company creation involved very early. How much control do you want to have in a company? And obviously valuation factors in because the lower the price, the more you rascal VCs own and the more control you can exert. But let's talk about control and what you look for and try to do.
I think in our case, if I talk sort of about the phase where we sort of incubate/maturate companies, in the end, we have a model where it's essentially just us as an investor. And then you have another partner, which is usually a service partner. It could be sort of an Evotech or a Wuxi or someone like that. And then you have basically the academic group and the TTO. So effectively, you could see in this very early phase, we're looking to a sort of partnership of these three groups, essentially. And essentially, you could say roughly that these three groups have basically also this part of control of this new endeavor that we're sort of embarking on. And then I guess afterwards, it becomes more sort of a traditional sort of seed or Series A type of control, where you will, in the end, have a syndication. You will have a board with like the usual governance metrics in place.
I think it's very similar for us too. I mean, at the stage that we are playing in, oftentimes it's first-time entrepreneurs and a single person there. So we are there with them right from the very beginning. So it's invariably, we are the only investors at the seed stage. most of times. And then Series A, it's the venture fund that leads the round, and there might be maybe one or two other investors. And then Series B, Perceptive is there at the back end. And being a large public fund crossover, they obviously take the lead in whatever the end result might be, or the exit strategy for that company might be. So yes, we are definitely, I guess, in charge there.
Yeah, it's certainly a point of advice for entrepreneurs is it's in your economic best interest to, as was said before, seek out more investors because you can fetch a better price, get a little, competition going, and better to have two bosses versus one. It's going to dilute the power among the VCs.
Yeah.
And the independent directors are fine, but often they defer to the VCs saying, look, you guys own, 25, 50% of this company. What do you want to do? I'm at your beck and call. There's a book out there I would recommend, probably many, but this one comes to mind, called The Founder's Dilemma by a guy named Noam Wasserman. And he was at HBS and a couple of other named business schools in the US. And essentially boil it down, and Wasserman's analysis is driven by tons of company data. And he concluded, you can be rich, you can be king, and never the twain shall meet. Yes, you've got exceptional people like Larry Ellison and Bill Gates and Mark Zuckerberg, and the list goes on. But for the most part, and to some degree, it's about control. If you want to be king, that's saying, I want to control my company and exert my will over what happens here. And if you want to be rich, that basically says you put more money in your pocket. And he concluded statistically significantly that those who want to be rich put more money in their pocket. To me, that says my emotions are worth something and control is worth something to me. I don't know how to monetize that, but essentially Wasserman did in his analysis. And so control matters to everybody. But once you get in bed with VCs, guess what? There's a large amount of control that does sit in our hands. That's just the reality of things, particularly when you get to a point where you've raised, 30, 40, $50 million or more. It's majority owned by investors, period. And so all those documents, make sure you understand what they mean. So hire a good counsel. What has the impact been for your companies that are involved in clinical studies because of the pandemic? What have you seen? Have things changed from, probably December timeframe, November, December, and work getting done in China with a lot of CROs and elsewhere, and what has happened in the U.S. and Western Europe for trial enrollments? And not to cite other geos, but what's been happening over the past few months?
I mean, some of the companies. I'm sorry.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Shola.
No, just briefly. Some of the companies were on hold. The clinical trials were on hold, but I think starting June, some of them are getting back on track. So it was a temporary delay.
Yeah, we've seen also in a number of our companies, trials obviously paused and now restarting, but it is going to be slow in recruiting additional patients because the hospitals are also just getting back to doing elective procedures. Like here in Massachusetts, I think it was only yesterday that outpatient physician offices can now start seeing routine non-urgent patients. And so obviously clinical trial, particularly for the initial enrollment of a patient in a clinical trial, that is an elective appointment. So we're starting to see it come back, but I think it's going to be a slow recovery, at least from our vantage point here in the United States.
Yeah, I would say the same things. The other thing I would add is there is going to be a difference depending on the therapeutic area and whether it requires an in-hospital setting, like if it's an IV or if it's an outpatient. But also one of the other things that we're looking to, or some of the companies are looking to do, is actually see what they could do at home at the whether the drugs can get delivered to the patient's homes instead. Okay. Just because there is some reluctance, you have to understand that a lot of these patients are don't feel good about going to hospitals right now, and they may be a higher risk health against COVID-19. So we're trying to relieve some of their fears by seeing if we can come to them somehow safely.
Yeah. Is telehealth playing at all into this realm of company developments? How is telehealth impacting, kind of akin to what AJ was saying a second ago about, gosh, if you can have some sort of home health component, how about telehealth?
I mean, I don't have any specific examples I can tell you from our own companies, but I'm pretty sure that it is, happening more than we've seen before.
Yeah, I definitely see in the future kind of a marriage of these of telehealth platforms where the clinical trial coordinator, even the research physician, him or herself, can interact with the patient, and then kits that can be sent to the house to do blood draws or to do other basic diagnostics. We're definitely going to see more of that in the future. Okay. We haven't seen much of it yet. I think because it's also going to require a bit of a culture change on the part of the medical system in embracing telehealth, and we've seen them make significant strides over the last 2 months because COVID really restricted the number of in-person appointments that could be taken. But I think it's still going to take time for everyone to feel comfortable in collecting very, very important clinical trial data over a phone, over a computer, or
and something about the laying on of hands, so to speak,
exactly.
that is important as well.
Exactly.
In all these cases. Kind of somewhat related. What's happening with the regulators? You've got obviously a pandemic, and FDA and analogous bodies elsewhere in the world are looking at things. Throw into that the shift that was happening in Europe from the regulators basically being housed in the UK and going across the pond, so to speak, the shorter pond. Peter, maybe you can chime in what you see happening in Europe, and then somebody chime in. What do you see happening with FDA?
I think, at least sort of if I look at our portfolio companies, for the most part, they're doing pretty okay in terms of sort of getting scientific advice, getting meetings. In the end, they have been, I think, whether it's EMA, whether it's FDA, whether it's sort of some regional authorities in Europe, they have been creative in sort of making it happen, also doing virtual meetings like we do. So I think I've not seen any significant delay because of the crisis there in terms of registrational interaction.
I can't speak firsthand experience about our portfolio companies, but I seem to recall reading or seeing some communication from the FDA about certain things are being deprioritized at this moment, and they're spending more time on COVID-19. And I don't know about all of you, but I never for once imagined how many COVID-19 companies there actually are out there now. Everybody seems to have a COVID-19 project. So
yeah,
it is very impressive though how quickly they've been able to pivot.
Exactly. Yeah. When you have to, you find a way.
Yeah. Kind of back to some generalizations. Are there any red flags, common mistakes that you see that as an entrepreneur wants to get meeting? And recall, for the entrepreneurs on the phone here, what's the goal of the first meeting? To get to the second meeting. And somewhere along the way, the goal is to get the money from our pockets, of course. But are there common mistakes that don't even get people to that first meeting, or footfalls that you see along the way? Anybody chime in? I'm sure everybody's got some good examples and no doubt a few funny stories as well.
I think right now it's just the face-to-face is impacting to some extent that personal connection. So I'm hoping that, this is still early days. We are still trying to go about business as usual in terms of interaction, but not having that face-to-face to really understand and build that rapport, that trust, that could have an impact on how we move forward. But in terms of mistakes that entrepreneurs are making, just trying to do your homework before you come and meet us. Your immediate circle, I'm sure there are people that you can talk to. Just get information before you come to us. We shouldn't be the ones providing information to you in the format that we want it.
Yeah. Maybe I've certainly got plenty of pet peeves, but I will only list a couple. But one, I get invites from companies who I just spoke to 2 months ago. And so it's clear that it's not even, I want to follow up on our last discussion 2 months ago. It's a carpet bomb, right? and I personally, you know, it annoys me. So that, and then people that in their meeting requests, as an example, and I'm talking more specifically about partnering, since this is a partnering conference, you know, those pet peeves, but also in their meeting invites, they literally say nothing, maybe one line. Hey, we're a great company, you should check us out. I mean, I get hundreds of requests at a conference like Bio, and I don't have the time to click and then click again, and then, you know, and then start reading about your company. So even just a little paragraph,
Give a hook.
just some kind of hook as to why.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to go into great detail. So I don't want this either. Again, I have a couple of hundred I have to read. So that's one of my major pet peeves.
So do you guys look at things that come in over the transom, or do you only look at referred deals? Everybody probably has a different take on these things, but how do you guys look at that random stuff that shows up?
We are very open. People reach out to us on the website, on LinkedIn,
Okay.
and we will look.
Yeah, no, we're pretty open as well. I mean, you never know where we see great science being done all over the country and all over the world, and just because they don't happen to know us personally, that still doesn't mean that we wouldn't be interested.
And part of I think about this as well is, you know, I sit here, you know, at my home office and wherever I happen to be, and read through those things. It's part of the pattern recognition that we all have to go through. Hey, gosh, is there something here that I saw one? Okay, I see two or three, often from disparate places in the world. Like, maybe there's something going on here. I should pay some heed. So, to the entrepreneurs, yes, we all tend to look at a bunch of things, at least based on this small sample size. A couple of specific areas, but to the participants, please chime in with questions, either through the Q&A box or the chat box you can see somewhere at the bottom of the screen. This is kind of like rapid fire. How about tissue regeneration? Thumbs up, thumbs down.
Same here. Yeah.
AI and ML as it relates to new therapeutics and having, I guess you can take this a lot of places, but high level AI, ML in therapeutics land.
It's gotten too crowded. I can't even.
I need to see wet lab data. That's really what I need to see in order, and then it doesn't really become an AI platform anymore. It's a traditional biotech. Yeah.
Since we do tech and healthcare, I've asked my tech colleagues who do a lot of AI and ML investing in software companies per se, hey, what do you think about this? And they're just completely dismissive. And sorry if I'm, you know, being a front to the entrepreneurs who are looking at things in this space. One of the things that my tech colleagues have said is, look, there's not enough data to inform the models. Yeah, you've got a ton of genetic data, but really what's applicable in your application is just a paucity of information. It just doesn't work that well. And then what we've seen as well is a lot of those companies end up at very high valuations. And then they come to us as traditional biotech investors and say, what do you think? And then we say, looks like a 10 pre-deal, back to the earlier part of the conversation. But I'm sitting at 120 post. Your problem, not mine. Because we see so many companies like you, and it doesn't mean you've necessarily de-risked, you know, going into phase 1, 2, and 3. I haven't seen data that says AI and ML have you know, bent that curve at all. It's still the risk of you can't predict biology.
Yeah, a pure in silico AI, you know, company wouldn't be for us. We'd have to see that there was some, you know, wet lab or at least some potential for wet lab soon.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah. And it feels to me akin to how many other waves of things have we seen, like, oh, this is going to have an impact. I started in this business in the late 90s, and the mapping of the human genome we were kind of on the cusp of that. Then it happened, and there was this amazing publication. This is going to have impact. Well, it is today. You know, 20 years later, we're starting to see the fruits of those labors. So these things take a long time. I have no doubt that AI and ML will be here to stay, and it's going to have massive impact in the industry. It's just going to take a long time. How about cell and gene therapy?
Yeah, same here. Actually looking at a lot of stuff right now.
Yeah, same here.
One that came in from the audience, neurodegenerative disease, focus of interest, which areas in neurodegenerative, what concerns and why?
I think with us, with neurodegeneration, it's the animal models and just the preclinical models in general, they're just not very predictive of human clinical response. And that's like, so we're not fundamentally opposed to neurodegeneration work. It's just getting that translatability right. And if someone's working on better preclinical models that really translate to the clinic, then that's amazing, and we need more of that.
Yeah, so I actually, while our venture fund, the venture fund I'm with, doesn't spend a whole lot of time in neurodegeneration, I personally spend a lot of time in ALS for the last 10 years. So I would say exactly the same thing as Sean. The biology and the translatability, certainly in ALS, isn't there. It's going to take some time, but it is a huge unmet need. So we will take a look at things, on a case-to-case basis, just because of the need.
Yep. Question from the audience: how comfortable are you with novel regulatory pathways where the leader will break the ground, high risk, but a clear path for the industry followers? I don't know if that means a 505(b)(2) necessarily, because I could certainly interpret that in the novel regulatory pathway, but any concerns with novel regulatory pathways? Not exactly sure what that means to some degree.
I'm not sure. Perhaps, I mean, I used to work for a microbiome company that, was started in 2006. So they were one of the pioneers in terms of regulatory discussions. But, a lot of time and energy gets expended trying to navigate the regulatory pathway, early on if you're a first, and but a lot of the other companies that have come on since then have managed to, leverage the previous company's work and move much faster and spent less money. So it's a double-edged sword.
Yep. Question just popped up. What about anti-aging as is, chemotherapy-induced accelerated aging? Anybody looking at this?
We're looking at aging in general, but we're looking at it with the caveat that with a lot of aging related diseases, the clinical trial path is very, very long and convoluted. And so if there are ways where you can get a very quick readout within 6 months, 12 months on some subset or some particular symptom or some particular biomarker, then that's something that we'd look at.
The chemotherapy induced accelerated aging, does that resonate with anybody? Okay. Yeah, I would agree. We're looking at many things that seem to be correlating with age, but how do you get to a readout that doesn't take you, 2, 3, 4 years? At some level, we'd like to see for a $15 to $30 million investment, I want to get proof of concept. Is this a drug, yes or no? And then hopefully you partner that with somebody else who's got deeper pockets and has the designs on a phase 3 study. So to the extent that entrepreneurs can think about what's that box we're trying to operate in, that's at least how we think about the world. And we've had companies go public or get acquired early days, but try to get to that sweet spot. We don't always get there, but that's at least one of the goals we try to have at a high level. And for that, I can have decent ownership. If something doesn't quite go right, I still have reserves. I can continue to support the company.
Absolutely.
But if you raise too much capital, I put too much out there, I worry about my investment getting crushed later on. And so I'm trying to be prudent about foot on the brake, foot on the gas.
So I was just going to add, Brent, the companies can do their homework as to what the VCs like in terms of areas. And so, for example, there are, I believe, at least a couple of VCs that are focused on anti-aging or diseases of aging. So, they'll probably get a better reception by starting there first.
And groups like Gates Foundation has been looking at anti-aging. I think Peter Thiel has. There's something, there's a fund called the Dementia Discovery Fund that's both, I think, US and UK, that's affiliated with SV Life Sciences. And so they're looking at, things like Alzheimer's and ALS and the list goes on. We're kind of nearing the end of the hour here, and I don't see other questions or chat questions. So entrepreneurs, anything else before we all part ways here? And maybe just a quick round robin that we'll start my screen. We'll go Shobha first. Any parting advice for the entrepreneurs that we haven't already covered here today? What's kind of a 20-second.
Reach out to us. We'll be happy to look at you.
Okay. AJ?
So maybe I'll turn it around a little bit and just talk about the future. And I think in the future, we're going to be doing a lot less effort looking at, Me Too's and looking at what companies are going to make an impact. And obviously, I think COVID-19 has given the industry an opportunity to shine. And, we've been under heavy criticism from all sides for probably 10, 15 years. And now we've been asked to save the world, right? And so I think, looking more deeply at companies that can actually make an impact in terms of global health is going to be something I think more VCs will be looking at down the road.
Sean?
Yeah, I'll just echo Shobha's advice. Reach out to investors. You never know when just a simple reach out email, you may have found that one person that really understands your company and wants to back it and make it a success.
Yeah, maybe to add, I mean, it's pretty common sense, but I think perseverance is really key. I mean, you just have to keep on knocking the doors, because I mean that's what we do when we do fundraising, and it's the same model for you guys, to raise money for any innovation. You just keep on doing it. That's the key trait you have to have.
Yep. We are open for business.
Exactly.
I think we're at the top of the hour, so thank you all to the panelists. Fun discussion. And Claire, you probably saw this, but somebody had asked, can the participants get our contact info? Of course, if you can't find it on the website, it should be available somewhere through RESI. But thank you all, and thanks to the Q&A from the participants. It was really interesting and fun.
Thank you, Brent.
Thank you.
Good to see you
Thanks,
all.
everybody.
Take care.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Stay safe.
Cheers. Bye-bye.